so I'm very happy that today I have the opportunity to be speaking to Amanda, who is somewhere on the northeast coast of the United States, preparing some new material, writing the next chapter in her battle against climate change. And I'm very happy. I'm very grateful that you found the time to be with us. And I'd like to open with a question, which is that you've been doing this for a very long time. And you've been working with Project Drawdown. And one of the most amazing things with Project Drawdown is that we found unexpected solutions that can have a very big impact in the battle against climate change. And some that actually, they garnered a lot of press. Can you tell us some of those solutions that people, they didn't think that they could have such a big impact?
Yeah, of course. So thank you so much for having me. And yeah, when we started Project Drawdown in 2013, it was out of a desire really to have kind of like a apples to apples comparison of energy and land and food and population and buildings and materials and transportation, all of these different climate solutions that were kind of bubbling up, and saying, like, what does it look like if we put the whole map together? What's the full, complete list, the most comprehensive plan that we have? And we had an intuition that soil and land and biomass would kind of rise to the top more than people had admitted before, but we had no idea that it would actually be 12 of the top 20 solutions are food and land based. So changing the way that we manage lands in terms of reforesting and protecting forests, protecting peatlands. Peatlands are really, they're kind of like marshlands. They cover 3% of the world's surface, but they hold 30% of our terrestrial carbon, the carbon in the soil. They're so vital that we protect those. And that's why it's really important to be good about where you're sourcing materials from. A lot of the palm oil in the Southeast Asia is coming from deforesting peatlands. So there's a lot of different dynamics too. It's not just planting trees, it's about protecting and growing trees, and then also changing our food practices. And another realm, we looked at population and family planning and discovered that family planning combined with girls' education was actually the top solution to climate change. So enabling girls and women to be empowered with their families to space and have fewer children if they decided to, can actually change our population in 2100. The low projection is 6 billion people and the high projection is 16 billion people. And that depends on the family planning decisions that we make over the next couple decades, because obviously it grows from there. So that 10 billion person differential between the low and the high can make or break the whole global ecosystem.
But isn't it amazing that one thing, empowering women and gender equality, which is a social problem, it's not, nobody would think it's an ecological problem, can have such serious ramifications. And I think a lot of the work you do has to do with that, right? Finding how there's certain behavioral things that we can tweak to make very big differences, right?
Yeah, and always kind of paying attention to like the downstream effects of different interactions and different solutions too. So with women and girls empowerment, you have all of these beautiful cascading benefits, these like cycles, these like reinforcing feedback loops of value and health and benefit and wealth for these communities and individuals, at every scale. Women are more likely to invest in their local communities, which it creates, more opportunity for small and medium-sized enterprises, which then enables more opportunity for other people in the community, enhances education, helps people, source materials more locally and more ecologically. It just goes on and on and on.
Oh, amazing. Small things that can make a very big impact. All right, let me hit you with a second question. So as a social entrepreneur and a social enterprise champion, you focus a lot of your efforts towards making business practices more symbiotic with nature, where you have business working with nature, not despite nature. And you've spoken of mutualism. And so I want to ask you why that is so important. Why is it so important for us to look for business models that are just working with GDP? And one of the cool things, again, I'd like to point out is that you're by no means a person who's a socialist or an anarchist who's saying we should stop doing business altogether and look for a new commune hippie way of living. But so explain to us why it's so important that business and enterprise enters this new way of understanding its relationship with nature.
Yeah, well, I'm very inspired by the life and work of Buckminster Fuller and have the honor of running the Buckminster Fuller Institute now. And he, and I am too now, is just totally inspired by how nature works. And he called it the eternally regenerative universe. So the kind of base state of nature, of the world around us, of the cosmos, is to eternally regenerate. So it's like a healing, life creating conditions for more life, which creates conditions for more life kind of state. And right now, business is kind of running down a lot of our natural capital. So it's using not just like the solar income and what that creates in its kind of cyclical manner and is always replenishing, but a lot of our practices now are extractive and really like running down some of the systems that we have, including people and individuals and communities, just being exploited along the way. And so if we create business models that are more nature inspired, that have that kind of cyclical regenerative kind of motto and strategy behind them, then we can have business forever and we can have thriving communities that endure and endure and endure. And learning from nature, there's so much there. Like if you really look to these, cycles and trying to attune yourself to these cycles of life that are creating more life, like a healthy ecology, a healthy kind of biosphere will have healthier waterways, will put carbon from the atmosphere into the ground, and you can tune yourself into those and enhance those. And then instead of having the identity of being kind of this like apex predator on the environment, which I think a lot of us have, we can be apex healers, kind of like keystone species that enables all of this healing to happen, which so many indigenous communities have known and practiced for millennia. Much of the Amazon was planted by people. It was created. Like those trees were planted on purpose for medicinal purposes, for fiber, for food. And the soil was built by people in the Amazon. It's called terra preta, and it was, right combination of compost and fish bones and ceramics and charcoal put together. And in some places in the Amazon, the soil is still growing 1 to 3 inches a year, just from like the humans having cultivated it for so long and really understanding what it is to build soil. So we have that potential within us, and our businesses can be that kind of apex healing force in the world. And I find it just so healing on a personal level to like, so many of us are walking around thinking like, oh, humans are a cancer. All we care about is growth, just this one singular, modus operandi. But actually we have this ability to like, create all these conditions for life to thrive.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's just like, I get chills when you're saying that. It's so beautiful. And so let me ask you just a question to do with that. So if we had to change one behavior or just like one thing in the mind or say in the culture of entrepreneurship or doing business, what would that be? Is it something to do with GDP or our conception of value? What do you think we need to tweak to see big results?
Yeah, I'd say, just seeing the larger context. So one, kind of systems thinking, both looking at the root causes of what it is that you're trying to solve in the world, and say, how can I not just solve kind of the surface level, but how can I dissolve the root of how this problem arose? And at the same time, look to the downstream effects of like, what am I doing that could actually cause unintended consequences down the line, and try to anticipate those so that you can, create those into positive effects. So looking at the whole system, looking at the whole context, you're, going to be better able to create actual value that creates more value in its wake. Like, I think that should be the goal of all of us, not just a singular profit motive, but how can we create value that creates, more health, that creates more benefit, and trying to heal with every step. So are you healing your employees? Are you healing yourself? Are you healing your community? Are you, with your sourcing, are you always attempting to and seeking to heal with every decision?
So like a broader conscientiousness that's not just profit driven, right?
Yeah. Or expanding what profit means. I mean, profit can be, increasing the capacity of your community to take care of itself. It doesn't have to be just numbers on your bank account.
It's lovely. It's lovely how you maintain this kind of the dynamics and kind of the understanding that business itself is not predatory per se, but it's like a weapon, which when you misuse it, it has terrible consequences. And so kind of really focusing on the people who are wielding this power and how they're applying it. But indeed, not moving away from the fact that business can be also used for the greater good, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, commerce for many millennia was kind of a, very grounded, kind of sacred act of like, oh, okay, my community, we have a plethora of walnuts and we're going to come in and it's, we're going to give it to you in a way that spreads, altruism and art. And, there's a way to do all of this that is like appreciative of the world and appreciative of everything that went into it, that we're so distracted by, we're so driven by convenience that we're just like, it seems like we're all just untethered.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
All right, let me ask you another question. So you were the co-founder of Project Drawdown. You worked with that for a very long time. And Project Drawdown was more about large-scale solutions, right? Mm-hmm. And I may be wrong, but now at the Buckminster Fuller, the whole idea revolves around regenerative design and really taking smaller problems and seeing how to make them positive for the environment, but also so that they can be scaled easily. So I wanted to ask, does that mean that your focus as an individual fighting climate change has shifted from looking for big solutions to big problems to looking to smaller solutions to those big problems?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think with Drawdown, at that point, I'd been working in climate for about 15 years, and no one had told me it was possible to reverse the warming, and that it could even happen in my lifetime. And we're talking about 350 parts per million, which is like the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, kind of the goal that we need to get to. We're at about 415 now. But no one really had like laid out the path. And so part of it was like, I just wanted to know. I was teaching an MBA course and I was teaching my students like where we are, where the solutions are, and kind of giving them a map of the current situation for climate. And I couldn't quite figure out if it was even possible. So Drawdown was an act to say like, is it possible? Can we actually reverse this warming? And we said, yes. By 2050, we can actually see temperatures come back down. They'll peak at about 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which is great news. And we have the technology. It's just like all we need is actually the will and the, energy from people. And then so now with Buckminster Fuller Institute, it's actually about getting those projects resourced. So, and finding projects that don't just solve for one solution, but try this kind of multi-pronged approach. So how can you solve as many problems as possible with one intervention? And so that's what we're doing with our project Regenerosity. We've partnered with the UN Development Program and Lush Cosmetics, and we have a whole pool of about 800 projects globally that are balancing the carbon cycle while also improving biodiversity, while also providing habitat for wildlife, while improving the livelihood of communities, doing things like planting mangrove trees in a way that can provide aquaculture and enable people to, continue to have income while protecting their local shorelines, which is really important for sea level rise, because we also need to do some adaptation because there are some baked in impacts of climate change that are coming down the pike. So yeah, I think, my journey has been like, is it possible? Okay, now it's possible. Let's resource the people who are already on the ground doing it, in their local context, aware of kind of all their local, both superpowers and kryptonites, blind spots that might be there, and really empowering the local and being of place, which is really the core of regenerative design.
Got it. So it's moving actually to really knowing that something can be done, then analyzing what are the key things we need to focus on. And so now you're actually working on the solutions that can yield the effects, the change that we need. And so one of the things I think, at least as just an ordinary person, often the question arises, who has to act first? Who has to take accountability? And usually we have these systems of mutual unaccountability where consumers say it should be the enterprises say it should be the government says, especially if they're liberal minded, they said, you guys should solve this thing. NGOs are the ones which are all the time going, hey, we need to pay attention to the problem. But we're not really working together. And I wanted to ask, have you learned of any best practices when it comes to synergies between, say, government, business, NGOs, and people, and what, for example, we should really be looking for when we're looking for this kind of nonlinear collaboration?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think within regenerative design and development, there's like a little bit of an allergy to the term best practices because it can sometimes not recognize the miraculous brilliance of each place. So I'd say wherever you are, kind of learn how in the past have people come together, or how can you learn from your place of how people are already coming together, and use those forces, use that inspiration that's of your place to provide insight and clarity on how people can work together. There's some really good tools. There's a group called Regenesis Group, and they have a whole process called Story of Place that enables people to see kind of what's unique about their place. But, we have learned definitely how to bring people together. A lot of it is around trust and individual connections. And, I think in a place like Lithuania, you're small enough that there's a lot of, kind of connections and cohesion amongst, maybe unlikely allies in other places. So how can you, move at the speed of trust is often said in business. And I think we can kind of relay it over to the regenerative business and design movements, just like building those individual connections and enabling us to kind of see common ground and find common ground and see that we actually all are working for the same thing.
That's such a beautiful phrase, to move at the speed of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this case, what's actually needed is for people to come together, maybe in the form of, say, hackathons or other meetings, conferences, just where you really encourage dialogue and see that everybody can see eye to eye and work together, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and find those common, those core values that, oh, wow, we actually do want the same thing, and find, I think surprising people with, oh, I wouldn't necessarily walk up to that person, but now I'm being paired with them, and oh my gosh, we actually have way more in common than I would have thought. And then, from that common ground, you can find, okay, what are the kind of core pieces of decisions that we need to make, kind of how do we sense make what needs to happen here? There's this interest and there's this interest and there's this interest, without saying like, what choices are we going to make off of it? Just finding those kind of nodes of where decisions need to be made and like sense making, rising information around those. And then once you have that common ground and you've all kind of mapped together, then when you're starting to make the actual choices, you'll be just better able to empathize with where the other people are coming from. It's and amazing. Then instead of compromising where each one has to kind of miss out, you can harmonize and come together.
Compromise instead of harmonize. But see, that's so beautiful, because again, we're looking at a core part of our operating system, of our common programming that we need to work on, in this case, trust. And actually, Lithuania has terrible numbers when it comes to trust. There's the trust in institutions is very low. Trust amongst ourselves is very, very low. And so obviously that's something that's not working for us. Another thing that we have that works against us is that we have this kind of we're complex in the sense that we don't think that we can actually make a change. We can make a difference, despite the fact that Lithuania was a place where we were one of the first people to move when it came to bringing down the Soviet Union, and people through peaceful uprising really helped topple this big regime, which seemed impossible, very much a David and Goliath moment. But say when we're talking about climate change, I'm kind of the person who thinks that maybe there's opportunities. And being a small country, do you think that there's anything else that we could take advantage of, that we could maybe show an example, or maybe even assume a leadership position in this battle?
Yeah, there's so much that you can do as a small country. You're more nimble. You can actually reach out to the majority of people and get like real coherence, in terms of getting the majority of people together on the same page. I'm reminded of Iceland and everything that's been going on there recently with their pirate party and how they were able to kind of come to leadership. There's a lot of examples out there I would look to and just kind of get to know their journey. Yeah, and then another thing that comes to mind is a lot of people are starting to focus on nature-based climate solutions. So I don't know what your kind of ecological, resources are, but making pledges around, bringing carbon, instead of decarbonizing, really like how do we bring the carbon from the atmosphere back into life, and that can be so healing when you actually have people like in touch with the soil and learning from nature. I feel like making some bold claims around that really, it can enliven people, and you'll find that there's like a common ground. People understand that we need to protect and be in relationship with nature. And it can be, kind of a bringing together of different political parties.
Oh, that's lovely. And I think, anyways, I mean, we usually look for smaller spaces when we're prototyping, when we're trying new things out, when we need to arrive at a proof of concept.
Right.
And so I agree that we can be nimble. But I mean, you need to believe that what you're going to do might actually serve as an example for other people watching, right? But that requires, again, a lot of trust in oneself and in one's own capacities. But that's beautiful. That's lovely. Amanda, thank you very much for sharing all this beautiful insight. I'm always happy to see you. I'm very inspired by everything you do, and I'm glad you found the time. Just to close the space, maybe I can ask you one last question concerning what people can do individually. What, as a person, should we be looking for? Again, in this infinite loop of unaccountability where we're looking for somebody else to solve our problems. What are there is there any advice or any inspiring examples or any tips you would offer to a person who says, I want to be a little bit more purposeful in the fight against climate change?
Yeah, a couple things there. One is we've been focused a lot on kind of like minimizing our carbon footprint. So like minimizing the bad that we do. And I like to inspire people to think about what's your carbon handprint. So what are you able to do that's positive? So like you as a leader could inspire so many different people to source their food in a way that's bringing carbon, down through photosynthesis and into the soil and back to life. Get to know your farmers. What are your different food sourcing? And then, Buckminster Fuller, he always talked about the power of the individual, and he said, it seems like the whole world is just passing by you, but actually you can stick out your foot in the right direction and everything will change. And I think in this moment with so much heaviness and so much change, I think the most dangerous thing we have right now is apathy, actually, is people feeling like they can't possibly change things. And that's what we lack the most. We have the technology, we have the solutions, we know how to do this. It's really just the will. So anything that you can do to cultivate your will and your enthusiasm and your vision and your imagination and creativity for a better world, that is like the most important thing you can do, and share it with others so that everyone can start to smell and taste and feel what that thriving future looks like. And then it'll just cascade into a more potential reality just by you imagining it and sharing
That's
it.
lovely. Wow, that's golden what you just said. Like really making it a personal experience, how it feels like to do this, and really feel also that your everyday kind of, or like hacking certain habits can have a certain impact, and that you can experience that and really know what it feels like. I think that's one of the important things that we really need to do looking towards the future. Prototype, tell me what it looks like, and even when we look at neuro-linguistic programming, someone will say, well, try to imagine how you would feel like, or what it would look like if you were in that reality you wanted to be. So that's actually a very beautiful way of looking at it. I'm infinitely grateful. I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I'm going to close this right now, but I'm looking forward to seeing you again in the future.
Yes.
Mwah.
Thank you so much. Good luck with everything.